Hey everyone, how are you doing today? This is James Sweeney, aka SplitSuit, and welcome back to another video. And in this video, we're going to run through a collection of suited connectors. So situations where we started the hand with a suited connector, and usually where we went post-flop. And we're going to talk about everything from single-raise pots to 3-bet pots. And a majority of this is probably going to be flush draw type hands, but we're also going to talk a little bit about straight draw type hands, hands where we caught a single pair, hands where we caught nothing, and kind of the way that we want to play those situations out as well. So if you feel a little confused with your suited connectors, or you're not 100% sure what lines to take with them when you catch this or that hand strength, this should be a very good video for that. This video is also going to be done in our inverse style, so we will not have any information on villain, so we're going to try to figure out why Hero took the line that he did. And I will actually give Hero's stats once again. So Hero in this video is a 17-13, ATS of 35, 3-bet of 3, fold verse 3-bet of 75, C-bet of 69, and fold verse C-bet of 60%. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it, start having some fun, and talk about our play with suited connectors. Okay, in this first hand we have 5-6. There is a min raise from 4x, and Hero decides to call. So this is kind of a little awkward, being that 4x started the hand with only 27 big blinds. Hero does have position, Hero is against the steal range, Hero is getting a decent price pre-flop, and the SPR won't be the smallest known to man, but it's also not going to be all that comfortable in my opinion. It is going to be a 6 SPR pot. Our average catch, other than of course air or just a single pair, is going to be draws. Playing draws in a 6 SPR pot is going to be a little awkward, as will playing second, third, or fourth pairs. So unless we have some sort of post-flop idea, or this guy is just ultra spewy or something, I really have nothing wrong with just saying forget it and either folding or 3-betting pre, but Hero does decide to call. Catch this board with a two-way straight draw, and 4x decides to pot it, and Hero decides to shove. So we can use a fold equity calc to make sure that this is a good shove. So we pull up our fold equity calculator. The effective stack is 25, which is how much we're shoving. The pot size is 8 after the $4 pot and $4 pot size C-bet. So the only thing we need left is the equity. So of course we can pull out Poker Stove for that. And you see we have 6-5 of hearts. This is the flop. So let's come up with a logical stack range for our opponent. So let's say that he's always going to stack off 6s, 3s, jacks, queens are better, ace jack, king jack, and what else would be fair? Let's give him ace king of diamonds. Give him ace queen of diamonds, and I don't know, let's give him, it is a steal pot, so we're giving him jack 4, jack 3, jack 4, jack 3. So that sounds pretty fair as a logical range that he would bet this and stack off with if he called our shove. So we're valid, and you notice that we have 31.4% equity, so 31.4. and submit that. And you notice that at this point we need 46% folds in order to break even. Now, I don't really ever expect to get 46% of folds here. This is someone who didn't start the hand with a full stack. We need him to be c-betting like a massive amount of the time, pretty much 100, and we need him to be folding a fairly large chunk of the time. So I don't really anticipate this being a massively profitable shove, and this kind of goes back to, again, why I didn't particularly love the pre-flop call. So as played, I mean, Hero did shove okay, but Hero really needs to make sure that he's being disciplined with these flop shoves, but more importantly being disciplined with his pre-flop hand selection, because if he is, this hand probably doesn't arise given these numbers as far as how much we're shoving and also what the pot size is. We do end up getting snapped off by kings, which sucks, and it is what it is, but again, I think Hero could have played this hand a bit better, and again, it's kind of important to do this kind of fold equity calculator stuff off the table, understand kind of where the break-even points are based upon how much you're risking versus what the pot size is, and also, of course, what your equity is against the logical range that your opponent would bet and stack off with. Okay, in this next hand we have 6-5. We decide to steal from the cutoff and actually end up getting called by everybody. Go 4-way to it, catch this board, and Hero decides to c-bet. So first and foremost, I like the c-bet, I like the size, everything's looking pretty good. If we face a raise, going to be making some math decisions. If we get called, going to have to anticipate playing turns a lot of the time. Good news is that majority of the time we're going to be playing that turn in position because there's only one person between ourselves and the button, but actually in this situation we end up getting called by exactly that person that we wanted to fold, and it is what it is. So we end up actually improving on the turn, which always makes life easy, and Hero decides to check. So I don't mind Hero's check if Hero thinks that Vixen is one of two player types, either a bluffy guy who just we need to check in order to induce bluffs and aggression from him, that can be totally fine, or if Vixen is the kind of player who we can go for like a check raise against, who's going to bet and then feel committed if we check raise with something like an ace-x hand or an ace and club type hand, that sort of thing. So I can totally be on board with that as well. As a pure default, I'm going to lead this out myself, probably something like 14.5, just simply because, especially at full ring and micro games, I can't assume that most players are going to bet this for me, and thus I have to bet it myself. But of course, with some information, this can be a fine check, especially if Hero thinks that this is going to happen a very large chunk of the time. It can totally be okay. Now, Hero decides to follow it up with the check jam, and I don't really like the check jam because a big part of the reason why you checked the turn was to induce bluffs or betting mistakes. So if you shove, there's no way he can make another betting or raising mistake. The only mistake he can make at that point is a call mistake. And it's kind of not giving him a great price to even do that. You've put your entire stack blatantly at risk, and it's the kind of situation where I don't expect Vixen to make enough call mistakes. And if Vixen were like some sort of mega fish, you could have just as easily bet 22 on the turn and tried to go for effectively a potter or something on the riv. So I don't really like this play by Hero. If Hero were trying to go for a check raise, I don't mind check raising this up to like 39 or 40. It gives him room if he's bluffing to possibly go for a bluff shove. It gives him a price if he has something like ace-x, and we don't think he's going to call the shove, which I wouldn't expect a very large chunk of the time. So in this situation, I think Hero just kind of lost himself quite a bit of value. I think he really actually only gets looked up by very rare sets and obviously the flushes that beat him. So I just don't expect this to be optimal in the slightest. I think Hero ended up losing quite a bit of val. So a little bit of discipline by Hero would have gone a long way here. Again, as a default, I'm going to be dubbing that turn myself for value. As played, if I go for the check to induce, I'm probably either going for a small check raise or possibly a check call, but most likely just a smallish check raise. Again, trying to give him room to either make some sort of bluffing mistake or a call mistake that he can follow up with another call mistake on the river. Okay, in this next hand we have Jack 10 suited and raise it from under the gun. So I just want to talk for a quick moment about raising big suited connectors and stuff under the gun or from early position. I can be on board with it if you have really good reasons for doing so. As a pure default, I usually wouldn't. I would simply have a stronger hand if I were going to do that and have no problem just folding this. But the two things that would lead me to wanting to open these kind of hands are if there are fish in the blinds that I'm trying to target, preferably fish with full stacks, not guys with 60 and or 50 big blind stacks as the case is. Or the other thing is that I think a lot of the people behind me are playing really fit or fold, going to do a ton of pre-flop folding, so I'm essentially treating it as like an early position steal with a hand that has equity if I get action. So those are kind of the two big things that I would think about if I were going to be opening a Jack 10 suited hand. And the thing about the fish in the blinds is not only that there are fish in the blinds, so again I have position on them post-flop, but also that I expect to get them heads up to myself. Creating a million way pot is monkey in the middle probably is not going to be an extra profitable thing. But Hero does decide to open it, get called by Night Skies, and go heads up to it. Catch this, and he donks $1, and Hero decides to attack it. So I can be okay with the attack here. I kind of go either way. I can easily call here and take away on a lot of turns and also take my draw for ultra cheap, or I can sometimes attack. Depends on how I think Night Skies is going to play, not only now, because I don't really mind if he calls now and he'll fold to a dub if, say, I brick the turn, but every single turn card either puts a 4 straight or an overcard on board pretty much, so I can be on board with considering that sort of line. It really is dependent on how I think Night Skies is going to play. When in doubt, calling's never going to be that bad here, and attacking can be just as valid as well. But we actually end up facing a min 3-bet from Night Skies, and we're kind of in that awkward situation here with the pot at 25.5 and trying to make a decision from here. So we have our three options as always. We can fold, we can call, or we can shove, essentially. And let's actually look at shoving first. So we're in a situation right now where the effective stack that we're shoving is 51.75, pot size is 25.5. Obviously, we need to pull up Poker Stove and figure out some equity stuff. So we have Jack 10 suited. This is the flop, and let's talk a little bit about about ranges for villain. So let's say that he would raise stack off a worst case stuff. So stuff like that, let's say 9s plus, and I don't know, let's put like a 6-5 or a 5-4 type hand in there as well. And that's probably pretty fair. We'll go with that. So we'll go to OK, valid. See, we have 38% equity against that. 38, good, and submit that. And you see we need at least roughly 10% of folds in order to break even here. Now, I wouldn't expect a tremendous amount of folds from someone who started the hand without a full stack and then decided to donk into you, which is fishy, and then decided to min 3-bet you, which is also fishy. So I really don't anticipate him folding all that much. Now, if we go back to Poker Stove and we change things just slightly, let's say that he's actually going to be stacking a different range, say a lot of 6x type stuff, and let's say all over pairs, and let's say, I don't know, the occasional club draw that we beat, and also a couple club draws that beat us. So this will, again, when I run these kind of things, I like to run them against various ranges just to kind of see how I perform all the way around. So 51.75, this is going to be 25.5, and I forgot how much equity we have, and 43. Good. Submit it. And you notice that at that point, against a better range for us, that we're actually plus EV even if villain never folds. Now, it's not massively profitable, but it's profitable nonetheless. So, against a worst case, we need a decent amount of folds. Against a better case, we're doing okay. So, this is why I run it against multiple, just to kind of see, okay, which range do I think it's more realistically going to be in this spot. But we also have to consider calling, because at this point we are getting 5-1. We're obviously doing plenty fine with equity. So I think this is a situation where I would rather just flat, especially when worst case scenario necessitates a decent amount of folds to make it a profitable shove. And I'm really starting to stretch. I mean, look, if we pull out Poker Stove, we really need to stretch in order to make this a even slightly profitable shove. Look at the kind of hands we need in his 3-bet range. So that's certainly up for debate in my opinion. So here I would probably just call, just like Hero did, try to actualize my equity for cheap, and even if I do brick the turn, given the way that he's playing his hand so far, there's a decent chance that I face a small bet and can take another price with position, even though the stack sizes are getting committed slowly but surely. But we actually do end up improving on the turn, which always makes life easy. Night Skies decides to bet, and Hero decides to raise. So I like that Hero's raising here. There are definitely some river cards that I don't want to allow to pop off for cheap, like a 5, a deuce, a 7, a club. All of those hands could either make my hand second best and or slow down action, which obviously I don't want to do. So in this situation, I actually don't mind if Hero goes a little bit bigger here. Hero could easily pot it here, and I wouldn't really say much. A pot would pretty much be a shove as well. So I have no problem doing that. You could also go for the smaller raise, but I'd probably just go larger here, just simply because I think Night Skies is going to continue making mistakes against it. And again, I don't want to let a crappy river card roll off that shuts down action. So on the riv, he donks again. Obviously, we're just in a shove mode. This is someone who is very, very fishy and has made that very, very obvious. But again, I think in the long run, that Hero's flop play is totally fine. I also think that Hero needs to be thinking about shoving that turn a little bit more often than going for the fancy raise to 25. And also, again, thinking about the pre-flop decision of should we have opened that hand in the first place. Again, kind of went through all the factors that go into this hand. And also, I think Hero played pre-flop possibly fine, but I think the flop was really good. The river was obviously standard. Turn could have been a little bit cleaner, but that could be me being a bit nitpicky to say the least. Okay, in this next hand we have 7-8 suited. There is a raise from I fold queens, and we decide to call. So as a default, I usually don't like calling suited connectors out of position, especially against steals, unless I have some idea on how I can play post flop. So I know that I can bluff check raise when I miss a decent amount. I know that there's incredible amounts of implied odds and or both of those things the times that I fold queens has a big hand. So I'm definitely thinking a step ahead in this situation. As a default, it's going to be very difficult to make money here. You're out of position. You're most likely holding, or sorry, catching. Other than catching, obviously air or a single pair is going to be a draw. Playing draws out of position is always going to be a bit awkward. And also, how are you going to play it when you catch a single pair, which is usually going to be second or third pair? And even when you catch top pair, how excited are you, and how easy is it going to be to play that hand out of position? So, like I said, I don't really like pre-flop, but I could be for it if there's some information on how you can play post-flop. But we do end up catching a two-way straight draw, which is always fun, and we check, and villain decides to bet, hero decides to check raise. So a big thing that I think about before I go for a check raise is, what do I expect to happen? Am I happy if my opponent does a bunch of different things? Am I happy if my opponent calls? Well, that puts me out of position. Pot's now very bloated. Yes, I have initiative, but I don't have position. I have some equity, yes, but if I miss the turn, which I'm going to do a fair chunk, my equity bricks off with only one card left to come, so that's something I need to think about. And also, am I happy if I fold queens decides to 3-bet? And not really most of the time, because then I'm in a situation where I'm essentially getting a lot of my stack involved, or at least at risk, with just a two-way straight draw. So I'm not particularly enamored with that, and that's definitely something that you want to make sure that you're thinking about. Now, the good thing is that our improvement cards are pretty well hidden, but by the same token, I'm not crazy about this in the first place. I also have nothing wrong with check calling here and donking turns that I miss, even donking the flop sometimes and then taking a note and seeing how I fold queens reacts to it. But again, I really wouldn't get in this situation because I wouldn't have called pre-flop. But overall, I think way too many people try to play their flush draws aggressively out of position as opposed to in position, and I just don't think it's really going to do a tremendous amount, especially at full ring. So I really have nothing wrong with just check calling the flop and taking a line, assuming that I called pre-flop. But in this situation, we end up facing pretty much a min 3-bet again, and we're deciding what we want to do. So in this particular situation, hero decides to call, and I can be on board with that. At this point, risking a fair chunk of money, we definitely need a fair chunk of folds in order to justify this, especially because against that 3-bet, we're probably against the stronger parts of ranges, things like sets and two pairs and over pairs and stuff like that. So I don't expect that this is going to be a profitable spot to shove in the slightest. You can pull out a fold equity calc and poker stove and confirm that. And in this situation, getting roughly 3.5 to 1, I don't mind hero's call here. It's going to be a little bit awkward, but again, hero kind of set that up for himself when he decided to check raise the draw. So we actually end up binking on the turn, which always makes life fun. Hero checks, I fold queens bets, and hero decides to check min raise. I am fine with the raise. I prefer it be a little bit larger, probably something like 49, 52, something in that range. Mostly because there are some cards that could kill action on the riv if we don't get it in here for whatever reason. Things like a 7 or an 8 might slow things down, and obviously I wouldn't want to do that, especially when I fold queens has pretty much said that he's very interested in this hand. So I think hero needs to be going for a larger raise here. As played, we faced the min 3-bet and obviously shove, so I'm happy about all that. I just think the hero could have played this hand a little bit cleaner when it came to that turn line. And again, even the flop line is up for debate as far as should we check raise or other. Like I said, I have nothing wrong with check calling the flop with intentions on making a play sometimes on the turn when I brick, and obviously probably going for a check raise when I do hit, if I do hit with that 6 especially. Okay, in this next hand we have 8-7 suited. It folds around, there's a raise, a call, and hero decides to squeeze. So, first and foremost is it's difficult to say if this is a good or bad squeeze simply because we don't have any information on these two opponents. So, when I make this kind of squeeze, kind of regardless of what my hand is. Usually my hope is for folds, assuming of course I don't have a value hand. So when I'm doing that, yes, 8-7 suited is fine, simply because I'm hoping for folds. If I get called, at least I have a hand that can hit some boards, do some things post-flop, but majority of the time when I'm squeezing with a hand like a suited connector or suited gapper, majority of the time it's with folds in mind. Now, the other part of the spectrum is making sure that neither of these two guys are fishy, because we don't want to do a lot of bluff squeezing, especially if one of these two guys are fish. And in this situation, Smokeout started the hand with half a stack, so it increases the chances that at least he's going to be fishy, which increases the chances that he doesn't fold preflop, and as we just talked about, we want folds preflop. So I don't expect this squeeze to be very good without massive amounts of info, and hopefully Hero had it, but in this situation he ends up facing a min 4-bet from Smokeout. So facing the back raise here is a little bit awkward because it's a min back raise, and we are getting an okay price at 4-1, but by the same token, do we really want to do anything here? If we look at our three options, we can fold, we can call, we can shove. I don't really want to shove. That's just going to be putting in even more money with less equity, and I don't expect Smokeout to back raise half his stack and then fold to it, so that's not going to happen. So I don't really want to shove. I don't really want to call either. Yeah, we're getting 4-1, but we're putting ourselves in a 0.5 SPR pot roughly, and how the heck is that going to make us money? I don't expect it to. So this is a situation where no option is good except for fold. So this is an extremely easy situation to hit the fold button, maybe take a note as far as whether or not your squeeze itself was good, and then just move on. But here I did decide to call, and I just think that's burning too much money, and decides to shove this board. But again, the major mistake was just simply pre-flop, and whether or not Hero should have been getting involved. Like I said, I think not, and whether or not he should have gotten involved with the squeeze is up for debate as well. And in this situation, just kind of gets his ass handed to him, which sucks, but by the same token, it's a very valuable lesson to make sure you're being disciplined pre-flop, both with your squeezes and the way you give action to back raises. And again, just it's a situation where the fold button is just so easily able to be found. Definitely don't hesitate to hit it. Okay, this next situation we have 6-5 suited. We decide to steal, get min 3-bet, and get called, and Hero decides to call, getting 7-1. So I can totally be on board with the steal. It's difficult to say without stats, but I'm probably behind it. Then when you face the min 3-bet in the call, I'm also calling. I have position, I have a high equity hand, I have skill edge, I have position edge, so overall I'm okay with preflop so far. And we end up catching a gut shot on this board and face 2 checks. And Hero decides to bet. I don't particularly like Hero's bet here. I don't expect to generate a lot of folds. One thing we have to remember is that Forever 420 did decide to cold call a 3-bet, albeit a min 3-bet, but called it nonetheless. And the other thing is that Crazy and Lazy, if he's bad enough to min 3-bet preflop, there's a decent chance that he's bad enough to even check call here with something like Ace-King or any stupid little pair. So I don't expect to create a lot of folds here. I also don't really have enough equity to justify this, given how often I expect to get action if I bet. So I would just check behind and try to actualize all my equity for cheap, but Hero decides to bet, and we end up actually getting both callers. 8 on the turn, so pretty much one of the better turn cards that could have popped off other than the filler for us, simply because at least it gives us extra outs with the 7 now being live. And we face a bet and a call. So this is obviously very bizarre action post-flop and even pre-flop with that min 3-bet and then the cold call of it. So in this situation, Hero's getting 8.4 to 1, so I'm totally on board with his call. I don't really want to go for a semi-bluff raise. I don't expect that to generate many folds from either of these two players. So overall, as played on the flop, the turn is a totally standard call. If it were a bigger bet, obviously we'd just be making math decisions as well. So river is a queen, 2 checks, and Hero decides to bet. So I really dislike the river bet, and I really don't expect to make many folds here. One is I don't expect Forever 420 to fold. His hand is probably like a 9s, 10s, jacks type hand, and I really don't expect that to fold, getting roughly 3.4 to 1 on the riv. And also Crazy and Lazy, there's a decent chance that he doesn't fold either with whatever stupid hand that he has. So this is the kind of spot where I don't expect the bluff to really get through anywhere near enough of the time. And if I'm hero, I'm just going to cut my losses. Part of being a good bluffer is not only knowing when to bluff, but just as importantly, knowing when not to bluff. So in this scenario, I would just say forget it and just be checking behind, take notes on whatever the heck both of them have, and just go forward from there. And here it does end up getting called off by jacks, which, like I said, I fully expected from someone like 420. And again, I think hero could have played this hand a bit better. Preflop was fine. Flop, I just would have checked behind. As played on the riv, though, definitely just check it behind, take a note, and go forward from there. Okay, in this last hand we have 6-5 suited and folds around. There's a raise from the carpet matches, and hero decides to call. So there was a hand earlier where I was talking about a suited connector from the blinds facing a steal, and I said I would fold, and a big part of the reason was because I was out of position. Now, in this situation, we're in position, and in position just makes everything a million times easier. It allows us to pick it up the times that carpet matches decides to check the flop. It allows us to take draws more easily, to maximize more easily the times that we end up smashing the board really hard. Makes bluffing easier, just makes everything a lot more profitable. So definitely make sure you're being aware of that, as position is one of the biggest factors in whether or not I play a suited connector other than things like price. And that's both in heads-up pots and in multi-way pots. It's just I'm very, very cautious on the position I'm in. If it's likely that I'm going to be out of position, chances are I'm not as likely to play that suited connector. But hero calls, which again I can be for or against. Most of the time I'm going to be okay with it though, especially with any post-flop idea. And we actually end up catching a straight flush, which is always fun. And we face a bet. So hero at this point decides to call. And I'm not saying that call is necessarily awful, but this is a spot where how would you play it if you just had a flush? We'll put it that way. Because a lot of people panic here because they have a straight flush, but in all actuality, is that really that much different than if you had, say, king jack of spades here? You know, it's roughly the same idea. You have a nuttish hand, and with a nuttish hand, especially on very wet connected boards, usually you're in a situation where you want to start raising and getting some money in, especially before you let crappy turn cards roll off that could slow down action, and we could list a ton of them. A 6, a 10, a jack, a 5, a spade might kill action if carpet doesn't have one, or maybe he goes into like a weird check call mode with something like a king of it or a queen of it. Either way, I just think that there's enough mistakes that carpet matches can make if we decide to go for a raise here, so I would just simply raise this up to $11 and go from there. A lot of people panic when they catch these super nuttish hands, things like quads or straight flushes, and for some odd reason just stop thinking about the way that they would normally maximize. And in this situation, like I said, you normally would maximize by raising strictly for val, and obviously I would do the same situation here. So hero decides to call, deuce in the turn, face a bet. Hero decides to raise here, which obviously I'm happy about. The size looks okay. If carpet matches, it's roughly a potter going into the riv, so I can be okay with that. And carpet matches, decides to shove, so obviously this is a snap, really no questions asked, and we end up winning. So that's always cool. But again, the big things to take away from this were the pre-flop decisions as far as should we be calling or should we consider going for either a 3-bet or a fold. Then the other is the flop line as far as do we want to raise or do we want to call and slow play. And I'm not saying the slow playing is an awful thing, especially against more of an aggro tard. I'm way more likely to do that. But again, someone who is a little bit more passive, or even if I don't have any information or fishy, I'm way more likely just to raise that flop myself strictly for value, start getting the pot going. And again, it's strictly value. Obviously, we had a nice result here. We probably would have gotten that same result regardless, actually, had we raised the flop. But overall, I think Hero's flop line could have been a bit cleaner. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. Again, we looked at a collection of hands where we had suited connectors, and a decent amount of this video was allocated towards pre-flop selection as far as should we have played that hand, how would we have considered playing it otherwise, and then the rest was on post-flop decisions. So should we play this draw more aggressively, how should we play our made stuff, and kind of how to play against a bunch of different player types, being that we did this in an inverse style. So you notice that a lot of pseudoconnector hands and draw type hands are very math based and very dependent on things like fold equity calculators and understanding your actual equity, and not only just your equity against their, say, betting range or their check call range, but also your equity against the range that they would logically continue with if you decided to make an aggressive action like a bluff shove or a semi-bluff shove or whatever it be. So overall, this should have given you a decent amount of ideas on how to play these kind of hands post-flop, again, what goes into them, also thinking about how to play them pre-flop and should you have even played them in the first place. So same as always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Otherwise, good luck out there, happy grinding, and good luck playing your suited connectors.